Who would have thought I would live to see the day when my right hand refused to obey? Tuesday morning, May 6th, will forever be etched in my memory as the moment when control slipped through my fingers. The cup of coffee slipped from my suddenly numb palm, shattered on the kitchen floor, and I slid down the wall without realizing what was happening. My head was spinning, my tongue was slipping. If it hadn't been for Ruth, the housekeeper, who'd come in just then and called an ambulance, who knows if I'd be here now. A stroke at 68 is not the kind of thing you put in your future plans, especially when you have a publishing company that demands attention every single day. Cranbrook Press is my brainchild that I've been growing for over 30 years. From a tiny office with just a desk and 2 chairs, we now have a 3-story building in downtown Dover and 48 employees. We specialize in historical fiction and memoirs, not the most lucrative niche, but respected, and more importantly, a favorite of mine. Rehabilitation took 2 months. My speech is almost back to normal, although I still stumble occasionally on words with hisses. My right hand is a bit of a mess, but I've learned to compensate with my left. My legs, thank all the gods, function normally, though the doctors insisted on a cane. Just to be on the safe side, they said. I know it's the first step to being recognized as an old man, but I have no choice. To fall a second time would be unforgivable stupidity. Today, for the first time since my illness, I sit in my office at Cranbrook Press. The oak desk, the dark green walls, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, everything here breathes stability. Only I've changed. In the mirror opposite, a gray-haired man with sunken cheeks and a tired look. Doctors say I'm doing well, but I feel it's the beginning of the end. Not life, of course, but its usual course. Edward, my deputy, has been managing all these weeks while I've been in the hospital and recovering at home. He brings me the reports, and I'm relieved to see that the company hasn't suffered from my absence. He tactfully suggests that I handle only the strategic issues and leave the operations to him. It's a smart move. No hard feelings for me, and the company is under control. Mr. Cranbrook, he says, taking a seat across from me, Callahan Publishing's offer still stands. They've even raised the price a little. Oh yes, Callahan Publishing is an old competitor of ours, and they've been offering to buy Cranbrook Press for the last year. I used to dismiss it, seeing no point in selling my life's work. Now, I don't know. Maybe I should listen. How much are they offering? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm. $7 million, Edward answered, and I couldn't help but sigh in surprise. I know it's more than we expected. I think your illness has made them more determined. They're afraid that if something happens to you, the company will go to the heirs, and they'll be harder to negotiate with. Heirs? My son Arthur is the only child from my marriage to Elizabeth, whom I lost 15 years ago. Arthur is a quiet, intelligent historian who teaches at a local college. He's never been interested in publishing, preferring the world of academia, but by law he will still inherit the company. I'll think about it, I say to Edward. $7 million is a good sum. Edward nods and walks away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I look at the picture on the table, me, Elizabeth, and little Arthur on a picnic. Happy times. Arthur is 35 now, married to Violet for 7 years. They have no children. Violet always said her career as a lawyer was more important than motherhood. Well, their choice. My thoughts are interrupted by a phone call. It's Arthur, asking how I'm feeling and if I need help. He suggests I come over tonight. I say yes, even though I know he's probably coming with Violet. And well, Violet's a specialty. I could never understand what my quiet, somewhat shy son found in this cold, calculating woman. Violet Winship is the kind of woman who always knows what she wants and will stop at nothing to get it. Tall, slender, with impeccable posture and a perpetually restrained smile. She is like a porcelain statue, beautiful, but cold and fragile. One wrong word and she'll shatter at your clumsiness, or shatter you. When they first met, I tried to warn my son. Something in her eyes, and gray, calculating, made me wary. But Arthur was fascinated. She's so determined, Dad, he said. She makes me feel important. Well, that's his choice, and I accepted it. For my son's sake, I tried to keep things civil with Violet, though it was getting harder every year. In the evening they arrive. Arthur hugs me gently, as if he's afraid of breaking me. He looks so much like his mother. The same soft features, the same kind eyes. A historian to the core, he's always been more immersed in the past than the present. Sometimes I think he chose his wife because, unlike him, she has her feet on the ground. Violet kisses my cheek, a ritual we've performed for years. Her perfume, expensive, with a hint of amber, is enveloping, almost suffocating. Oliver, how are you feeling? She asks, giving me an appraising look. You look tired. You should get more rest. I'm fine, I answer, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I feel. It's my first day at the office, so I'm a little tired. The office? Her eyebrows go up. You're back to work already? Did Dr. Reed approve? Arthur throws his wife a warning glance, but she ignores it. Violet, Dad knows what he's doing, he says quietly. He's always been careful. Of course, darling, she replies with a smile that doesn't affect her eyes. I'm just looking out for your father's health. We move into the living room. Ruth brings tea and cookies, which I barely touch. My appetite hasn't fully returned after the stroke. How are things at the company? Ari, Violet asked casually, stirring her tea with a silver spoon. Fine, I answered briefly. Edward was doing fine without me. Edward, she repeats thoughtfully. He's been with you a long time, hasn't he? Do you trust him completely? Arthur glances at her again, more insistent this time. Violet, not now, he says quietly. I'm just wondering, she shrugs. After all, Cranbrook Press is a family business. We should all be aware of it. A family business? That's an interesting twist. She's never shown any interest in publishing before. At most, she'd ask how things were going, and that was only as a courtesy. The company's fine, I said, setting my cup aside. No need to worry. Oliver, Violet leaned forward, her eyes suddenly serious. Have you thought about slowing down a little? After a health situation like this. Health situation, a lot of people are reevaluating their priorities. What are you suggesting? I'm asking straight out, even though I'm guessing. Perhaps we should think about devolving some of our powers. Arthur could help you. She puts her hand on her husband's knee. Wouldn't you, darling? Arthur looks surprised and a little embarrassed. Violet, I don't know anything about publishing, he says, and I have lectures, research. It can all be combined, she cuts him off. Your father needs help, and you're his only son. A subtle manipulation I can see right through. Arthur doesn't. He's always been too trusting, especially of those he loves. I can handle it, I say firmly. I have Edward and the whole team. Arthur doesn't need to give up his career. Violet presses her lips together, but doesn't insist. The conversation moves on to other topics, but I notice how she occasionally returns to questions about my health and the company. It's like she's probing. When they leave, I sit in silence for a long time. Something has changed. Violet has never taken such an active interest in my business before. Now all of a sudden she's talking about the family business. Coincidence with my illness? I don't think so. The next day, something else unusual happens. I get a call from Eleanor Winship, Violet's mother. We've only seen each other a few times, at Arthur's wedding and a couple of family dinners. She's always been as aloof as her daughter, and now she's calling, expressing her condolences about my illness and suggesting I stop by to support an old family friend. An old friend? We barely know each other, but I agree out of politeness. Eleanor arrives the next day. She is Violet in the future, same cold eyes, same reserved mannerisms, only the wrinkles are deeper and her hair is carefully dyed auburn. They are so much alike that it's almost frightening. Oliver, darling, she says, kissing the air near my cheek. You look so much better than I expected. Doctors work miracles these days. She walks through to the living room, looking around with an interest that seems feigned to me. It's a beautiful house, she comments. I've always admired your taste. You and Elizabeth have arranged everything so well. The mention of my late wife sounds almost sacrilegious coming out of her mouth. Eleanor was never friends with Elizabeth. They'd only met a couple of times, and Elise said afterward that the woman reeked of coldness and calculation. To what do I owe this visit? I asked directly, never a fan of small talk. Eleanor smiles, a smile that doesn't affect her eyes like her daughter's. Just worried about you, Oliver. Such a serious illness. And you're here alone. I thought I could help. You know, a lot of people need constant care after a stroke. I have Ruth, I say discreetly. She comes every day. A housekeeper is not the same as a family. Eleanor shakes her head. Violet is very worried. We're both worried. I look at her carefully. What's behind this sudden show of concern? Yesterday, Violet was interested in the company's affairs. Today, her mother offers to help with her care. Violet and I were thinking, Eleanor continues, maybe you should move closer to her and Arthur. There's a marvelous boarding house for the elderly not far from their home, with medical care, social programs. A boarding house? I can't believe what I'm hearing. You're suggesting I move into a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, she quickly corrects me. It's a state-of-the-art facility for people who need a little help with their daily lives. A very dignified place. I do quite well in my own home, I reply coldly. Aha, and I don't need a little help. Eleanor raises her hands in a conciliatory gesture. Of course, of course. It's just a suggestion. For the future. No one's saying you have to move right now. The rest of the visit passes in tense conversation about the weather and city news. When she finally leaves, I feel like something heavy and stuffy has been carried out of the house. In the evening, Arthur calls asking how his mother-in-law's visit went. I can hear the tension in his voice. It was Violet's idea, he says guiltily. She thinks you need more socializing. After Mom, you've become withdrawn. Is that why she sent her mother to suggest that I move into a nursing home? I can't help but be sarcastic. What? Arthur sounds genuinely surprised. No, she didn't say anything like that. She just wanted Mom to visit you, keep you company. Either my son is unaware of his wife's plans or he's lying. I want to believe the former. The next days bring new visits from Eleanor. She literally becomes a regular guest in my house. Each time she comes with some pretext. She brings homemade cookies, a new herbal tea to strengthen blood vessels, a book that we'll definitely like. And every time she starts talking about my health, about how hard it is to live alone in a big house, about the wonderful support Arthur and Violet have, she's also asking more and more about the company, as if casually. I hear the publishing business is going through a bad time, she says, stirring her tea. E-books, the internet. It must be hard to compete, huh? We've found our niche, I answer briefly. Historical literature will always have its reader. And yet, she leans closer. Don't you think it's time to think about the future? Hand over the reins to the young? Arthur could, Arthur's a historian, not a publisher, I interrupt her. He's never been interested in business. But Violet could help, Eleanor said, smiling. She has a law degree, a sharp mind. She and Arthur would make a great team. That's it. Not Arthur, Violet. It all makes sense now. I'll think about it, I answer neutrally, though I'm tense inside. When Eleanor leaves, I call Edward. It's time to seriously consider Callahan Publishing's offer. $7 million suddenly seems like a very attractive sum, especially since my sister-in-law and her mother seem to be making plans for my company. The formal offer from Callahan Publishing arrived a week after I'd spoken to Edward. A massive gold-embossed envelope with an impeccably worded contract and a cover letter signed by Hugo Callahan himself. I sat in my office, rereading the documents over and over, trying to find the catch. $7 million. A sum that 15 years ago would have seemed astronomical to me, and even now, frankly, was impressive. Hugo wrote, "Dear Oliver, our companies have been competitors for many years, but I have always respected what you have built. Cranbrook Press is an impeccable publisher with a reputation to envy. We will ensure that we preserve your legacy and carry on your traditions." Beautiful words, but I've been in the business long enough to know that such promises are worth no more than the paper they're written on. Once the contract is signed, Hugo is free to do whatever he wants with the company. Maybe at first they will indeed keep their direction, but gradually things will change. It's inevitable. On the other hand, wouldn't the same thing happen if Violet took over? She would hardly worry about keeping traditions alive. Cranbrook Press is nothing more than an asset for her to monetize. I set the papers aside and walked to the window. Outside, the typical Dover rain was drizzling, turning the streets into blurry watercolor landscapes. 32 years ago, when I founded the company on a rainy day like this, Elizabeth brought me a cup of hot tea and said, "If you believe in this business, I believe in you." She has always supported me, even in the most difficult times when we were barely making ends meet. What would she say now? Would she tell me to sell? Elizabeth was a pragmatist, but she also valued what money couldn't measure. She'd probably say, Oliver, what do you really want? What do I want? The answer used to be simple: to keep growing the company, keep producing good books, keep the legacy alive. But now, after the stroke, my energy is draining faster, my concentration isn't the same, and sometimes my treacherously trembling hand can't even sign a document the first time. The reality is that I'm no longer the Oliver Cranbrook who could work 16 hours a day. In addition, Eleanor's visits have become more and more insistent and her questions more and more direct. Yesterday she inquired, as if by the way, how much the Cranbrook Press was worth, according to my estimates. Just curious how the publishing business is valued these days, she said with the same smile that never touches her eyes. I lied, quoting an amount half as much as Callahan's offer. Her disappointment couldn't be hidden. Her face contorted for a split second before returning to its usual mask of polite interest. Just that? And I thought such a famous brand cost so much more. That moment was another piece of the puzzle that was slowly forming in my head. Why would Eleanor need to know the value of the company? And why would a woman who had barely dignified me with a few words at family dinners be so interested in my business? I went back to the table and picked up the contract again. The terms were more than generous. In addition to the principal sum, Callahan was offering me to stay on as a consultant at a very comfortable salary. Obviously, he wanted to use my name and connections in the interim. It made sense. Many authors had worked with me personally, and an abrupt breakup could lead to their departure. The phone rang. Arthur. He'd been calling more often than usual the last few days, as if making up for years of relative inattention. Dad, how are you? Sue. There was genuine concern in his voice. I wanted to stop by tonight, if you don't mind. Of course I don't mind, I answered. Are you coming alone? A pause. A pause so short that the other man wouldn't have noticed. With Violet, actually. She wants to talk to you about something about, nursing, medical care. One more try. Oliver, Arthur continued, and I heard his tone change. More formal, as if he were reading from a prepared text. Violet and I were thinking, maybe you should get a power of attorney. In case, in case you get sick again. Power of attorney? I was trying to keep my voice neutral. Yeah, to run things if you're, incapacitated, he said the last word almost in a whisper, as if ashamed. And on whom do you propose to make this power of attorney? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Well, another pause. Violet says she might. She's a lawyer. She knows about this kind of thing. That's it. The puzzle was complete. Now I could see the plan in all its glory. Get power of attorney to manage my affairs, and then probably get me declared incompetent. After the stroke, it wouldn't be that hard. Just a couple of good medical reports from the right doctors. And Violet, as a lawyer, knew exactly how to organize it. I'll think about it, Arthur, I said calmly. Come back tonight and we'll discuss it. I hung up the phone and dialed Edward's number. Edward, get Callahan on the phone. Tell him I'm ready to accept the offer, but on one condition. The deal must be closed within a week and in complete secrecy. No press releases, no announcements until I decide to announce it myself. It was an unusual demand, and Edward couldn't hide his surprise. May I ask why, sir? Family reasons, I answered briefly. One more thing, Edward. Find me a good financial advisor. I'll need to set up some accounts and maybe a trust. After the call, I sat there and thought. What had recently appeared to be an old man's paranoia was now becoming clearer and clearer. Violet and Eleanor were up to something, and at the center of their plan was my company. It wasn't family concern that drove them, but cold calculation. I remembered how I'd met Violet. Arthur had brought her to dinner, so elegant and confident. She talked about her work at the law firm, about the prospects, about how important it was to be able to anticipate risks. In our business, the most important thing is to anticipate all eventualities and always be one step ahead, she said at the time. Now she seemed to be applying her professional skills to her personal life, and I needed to be one step ahead of her. In the evening, they arrived as promised. Violet looked especially well, groomed, a fresh haircut, pearl earrings, a strict ivory suit, a businesswoman who'd come to close an important deal. Oliver, she kissed my cheek. You're looking better. Rest is good for you. Arthur hugged me tighter than usual, as if apologizing for what was about to happen. Dad, are you okay? Are you taking your meds? Everything's on schedule, I smiled. Ruth is watching. We went into the living room. There was tea and cookies on the table. Ruth had known about the visit and had made an effort. So, I began, not waiting for them to get to the purpose of the visit. You wanted to talk about the power of attorney? Violet tensed a little, not expecting me to start the conversation. Yes, we think it would be wise. She pulled a folder of documents out of her purse. Considering the circumstances. What kind of circumstances? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Your health, Oliver. She held my gaze. After a stroke, the risk of another attack increases significantly. And if that happens, someone has to have the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf. Including decisions about Cranbrook Press? Violet smiled faintly. Of course. The company is an important part of your assets. You need to make sure it stays in operation, even in a critical situation. Arthur shifted his gaze from his wife to me and back again, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its true cause. Anyway, Dad, it's standard practice, he said softly, just a precaution. And who will be my proxy? I asked, even though I knew the answer. I think Violet could, Arthur began, but I interrupted him. Why not you, son? Arthur hesitated, glancing uncertainly at his wife. Yeah, I don't know much about legal matters, and I have work, research, and Violet, of course, has a lot of free time, I said sarcastically. It's not about time, Violet interjected. It's about competence. I'm a lawyer, Oliver. I know how to operate in the legal field, how to protect your interests, my interests, or yours. I understand your concerns, she continued. This is a big step, but think about safety, your peace of mind. What if something happens to you and you don't have the documents you need? I remained silent, pretending to consider her words. In fact, I'd already made up my mind. Even before they arrived. Maybe you're right, I said at last, but I'd like my lawyer to prepare the documents, someone I've worked with for years. Violet tensed. This wasn't part of her plan. Of course, if it makes you feel more comfortable, she said after a pause. But we could speed things up. I've already prepared all the necessary paperwork. I prefer not to rush into things like that, I replied. Besides, I need to discuss some details about the company with my lawyer. What kind of details? She asked too quickly, betraying her interest. Nothing in particular. I just want to make sure that all aspects are taken care of. I could see that my answer didn't satisfy her, but she couldn't insist without revealing her true intentions. The rest of the evening passed in tense conversation about neutral topics. When they left, I called Edward immediately. What news from Callahan? He's agreed to your terms, Edward replied. The deal can be closed in 3 or 4 days if you sign the papers tomorrow. Great, I'll be in the office by 10. The next day I signed the papers. Hugo Callahan, a short, energetic man with shrewd eyes, shook my hand and said, You won't regret it, Oliver. I'll keep the soul of the Cranbrook Press. He may have been lying, but it didn't matter much at that moment. The important thing was that the company was no longer my problem, and it couldn't fall prey to Violet. The money was due in my account in 2 days. I'd made sure it was transferred to a new account at another bank that neither Arthur nor Violet knew about. The account was in my name, but with the option to transfer the funds to a trust in the event of my death or incapacity. Arthur was named as the beneficiary of the trust, but with the stipulation that he could only receive the money in the event of Violet's divorce or death. Brutal? Perhaps. But I wasn't going to take any more chances. Eleanor called in the evening. She sounded too cheerful, which was always unsettling. Oliver, darling, how are you? I thought I'd stop by tomorrow and bring you some fresh baked goods. I'll be busy tomorrow, I answered. Company business. Oh, she couldn't hide her disappointment. What about tonight? We could have dinner together. You work too much. You need to rest. I'll think about it, she replied evasively. I'll call you when I'm free. After talking to Eleanor, I called an old friend, James Hall, who worked as a private detective. We'd known each other since high school, and on several occasions he'd helped me check out authors whose manuscripts were questionable. There had been cases of plagiarism that we'd stopped before publication. James, I need your help, I said without preamble. It's confidential. Anything for you, Ollie, he replied. James was the only one who still called me by my childhood nickname. I need you to check on someone. My sister-in-law, Violet Cranbrook, and her mother, Eleanor Winship. Anything you can find. Finances, contacts, unusual activity lately. James whistled. Family business? Really? Very serious, I confirmed. I have reason to believe that they don't wish me well. Okay, he said after a pause. Give me a week. I'll get back to you when I have something concrete. I hung up the phone and went to the window. Outside, dusk was fading, turning the street into a blurry canvas of gray and blue. Somewhere out there, on the other side of town, Violet and Eleanor were probably making plans for my company, unaware that it had already been sold. What would they do when they found out? How would Arthur react? I didn't go to the office the next day. I told Ruthie I wasn't feeling well and stayed in bed. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I needed time to think, and I didn't want to see Eleanor if she decided to stop by. By lunchtime, Edward called. Mr. Cranbrook, the money has been deposited. The transaction is complete. Thank you, Edward. I felt strangely relieved. What about the employees? Mr. Callahan plans to meet with the staff tomorrow. He asked you to attend for a, smooth transition. I'll be there, I promised. And Edward, thank you for everything. In the evening, Arthur called again. I could hear the tension in his voice. Dad, are you okay? Violet said she called you about the papers, but you didn't answer. I was surprised Violet didn't call me. I guess she'd decided to go through her son. I was resting, I answered evasively. I'm a little tired today. Do you need any help? Should I call a doctor? No, I'm fine. Just a little weak. Dad, Arthur paused. Have you thought about what we talked about? About the power of attorney? Yes, son. I'll be meeting with my lawyer next week. He'll prepare all the necessary documents. Good, he sounded pleased. Violet will be calmer. We will. How long ago had it been since my son stopped speaking for himself and started using that impersonal we? When did Violet absorb his individuality? Arthur, I asked suddenly, are you happy? What? He clearly hadn't expected that question. Of course I am, Dad. Why do you ask? No reason. Old thoughts. After talking to my son, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking. Outside the window it began to rain. The drops drummed on the glass, creating a cozy background noise. At times like this, I felt Elizabeth's absence especially keenly. She would know what to do. She always knew how to find the right words for Arthur. The phone rang. I expected it to be Arthur again, but it was Violet. Oliver, she sounded concerned. Arthur said you weren't feeling well. Should I come over? Get something from the drugstore? No need, I answered. It's just fatigue. It'll go away in the morning. Are you sure? Mom's worried too. She wanted to visit you today. Tell Eleanor I said thank you, but that won't be necessary. As you wish, she said, a touch of irritation in her voice. Speaking of that conversation, about the power of attorney, have you thought about it? Arthur said you wanted to go to your lawyer, but I prefer to work with someone I've known for years, I interrupted. It's nothing personal, Violet. Of course. Her voice was soft again. I understand. I just wanted to help. After the conversation, I felt the tension of the last few days wash over me. Fatigue, anxiety, uncertainty, all mixed together. I took a sleeping pill and went to bed earlier than usual. In the morning, I was woken by a call from James. Ollie, I've got something interesting, he said without preamble. Your sister-in-law met with a Dr. Morris yesterday. He specializes in neurological disorders and is often an expert witness in disability courts. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you sure? Positive. I have pictures of their meeting at the coffee shop. They'd been talking for about an hour, and it looked like they were taking notes. What else? Eleanor Winship has been to Sunset Gardens Nursing Home 3 times in the last month. It's not the most prestigious facility, to say the least, but she was clearly interested in the accommodations, the cost, the process. The puzzle was finally coming together. They were really planning to declare me incompetent and put me in a cheap nursing home while taking control of the company. Thank you, James, I said. Keep watching. I need to know all their moves. Will do. And Ollie, be careful. If they're really up to what you're talking about, they could be dangerous. I hung up the phone and exhaled slowly. I had proof now. Violet and Eleanor were indeed plotting against me, and I was glad I'd sold the company before they put their plan into action. Today was the day to meet with the Cranbrook Press staff and officially hand over control to Hugo Callahan. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sad because an important chapter of my life was coming to an end. Relief because I had won the first round in the game Violet and Eleanor had forced upon me. But it was only the first victory. What lay ahead was to decide how to deal with Arthur, whether to tell him the truth about his wife or to let him make that painful choice himself. The meeting at the Cranbrook Press went better than I'd expected. Hugo Callahan, to his credit, was not only a smart businessman, but also a man of his word. He announced to the staff that he intended to maintain the direction of the publishing house and had no plans for layoffs. Moreover, he promised to expand the historical catalog and increase circulation. When I looked at the faces of my staff, relieved, even enthusiastic, I realized I had made the right decision. After the official part, Hugo took me aside. "Oliver, I still don't understand why you insisted on keeping the deal confidential," he said softly. "Can I ask why now?" I hesitated. On the one hand, it was my own business. On the other hand, Hugo had a right to know, because his well-being depended on it too. "Family matters," I answered evasively. "Let's just say that not all of my relatives would approve of the sale." Hugo nodded understandingly. "Don't worry, we'll keep the transaction amount and details secret until you say you're ready to go public. Officially, I'll just be considered the new managing partner." "Deal?" I shook his hand, feeling genuinely grateful. This man, my former competitor, showed more concern for my interests than his own family. The money from the sale, $7 million, had already been deposited into a new account. I immediately set up a trust for Arthur with deferred access. If something happened to me, my son would get the money, but only under certain conditions. It was cruel but necessary. I couldn't let that money fall into Violet's hands. When I got home, I found 3 missed calls from Eleanor and 1 from Violet. I didn't call back. I'd say I was tired if they asked. I needed time to come to terms with my new reality. I no longer owned the Cranbrook Press. I'm just an older man with $7 million in an account in a toxic family that doesn't know about the money. In the evening, Arthur called. His voice sounded excited. "Dad, I heard some strange rumors about the company. They say there was a meeting today and some Callahan was introduced as the new partner. Is that true?" That was fast. News travels like wildfire in a small town. "Yes, Hugo Callahan will now be helping me run the company," I answered, technically not lying. "After my stroke, it's hard for me to keep up with all the workload." "But why didn't you tell me?" There was resentment in his voice. "We talked about this. Violet could have—" "Arthur," I interrupted, "it was an urgent business decision. Callahan is a publishing professional with 30 years of experience. He knows the industry like the back of his hand." And yet, Arthur didn't give up. "We're family. Decisions like this need to be made together." Together. He said together, but he didn't mean me and him. He meant him and Violet. "You're right, son," I sighed. "Come over for dinner tomorrow and we'll talk about it in detail. I'll explain everything." Of course, I wasn't going to tell the whole truth, but I needed to meet them face to face to see how far they were willing to go. The next day, I asked Ruth to prepare a special dinner. "A family celebration," I said without going into details. She set the table in the dining room, which we used only on special occasions. Candelabras, silver, china, just the way Elizabeth liked it. Violet and Arthur arrived at 7 sharp. Eleanor followed, to my surprise. An uninvited guest, but quite expected. "I hope you don't mind that I invited Mom," Violet said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "She's so worried about you." "Of course I don't mind," I lied. "The more the merrier." We made our way to the dining room. Arthur looked tense, Violet looked wary, and Eleanor radiated curiosity. "What a lovely dinner," she chirped, looking around the table. "So, formal, special occasion?" "You could say that," I replied, pouring the wine. "I wanted to discuss the future with you, my own and the company's." Violet was instantly alert, like a predator on the prowl. Her eyes sparkled. "We're listening, Oliver." I took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. They thought they had me cornered, but they didn't know I was already out of the game. I've been thinking a lot since the stroke, I began. About life, about death, about what really matters. And I came to the conclusion that it was time to slow down. A very wise decision, Eleanor nodded. At our age, health must come first. Exactly, I agreed. That's why I've decided to hand over most of the management of the company to Hugo Callahan. He'll handle the day-to-day issues, and I'll concentrate on strategy. Violet frowned. And you made this decision without consulting your family? There was an undercurrent of reproach in her voice. It was a business decision, Violet, I said calmly. In business, sometimes you have to act quickly. And yet, Eleanor interjected, when it's a family company, it's only logical to discuss such changes with those closest to you. Especially the heir. She nodded at Arthur, who looked confused, as if he didn't know what was going on. Arthur's never been interested in publishing, I said, looking at my son. He has his own career, his own interests. But circumstances change, Violet objected. Now that your health is at risk, Arthur is ready to take on more responsibility. We both are. That's it. Both of us. As I thought, Violet saw herself at the head of the company, with Arthur as her figurehead. That's very touching, I smiled. But as I said, it's settled. Hugo Callahan is an experienced publisher, and he will keep the spirit of Cranbrook Press alive. But it's your company, Eleanor almost exclaimed, then pulled herself together. I mean, how can you trust an outsider to run it? Hugo is not an outsider, I countered. We've known each other for 30 years. I have every reason to trust him. Violet exchanged a quick glance with her mother. Something in what I said made them uneasy. And yet, Oliver, she said, lowering her voice to an almost intimate whisper, in your position, it's safer to keep control in the family. Arthur's not a publisher, I interrupted. He's a historian, and a fine historian, and I'm proud of him. But publishing is a different field. I could help, Violet insisted. With my legal experience, the decision has been made. I tried to keep my voice soft but firm. The contract with Callahan was signed. There was silence around the table. Arthur looked confused. Violet looked furious. And Eleanor looked as wary as a fox smelling a trap. What contract? Honey, Violet finally asked. What are the terms? A standard management contract, I answered evasively. Hugo gets a percentage of the profits and freedom to make operational decisions. I'd like to see that document, Violet said in a tone that brooked no objection. As a lawyer, I could, That won't be necessary, I interrupted. The document was drawn up by my lawyers, and I'm perfectly happy with it. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. We talked about the weather, the latest city news, the health of mutual acquaintances, anything but what really concerned each of us. When they left, I felt strangely relieved. The first act of the drama had been played. Now I had to prepare for the second. The next morning, I was woken up by a call from James. Ollie, I've got news, he said without preamble. Your sister-in-law had met with Dr. Morris again, and this time she wasn't alone. There was another doctor with her, one Dr. Lewinsky. He specializes in geriatrics and is also a frequent expert witness in court. They're putting together a concilium, I muttered. That sounds about right. And one more thing. Eleanor Winship visited the office of the law firm Bradley and Associates yesterday. They specialize in family law and custody matters. Custody? They were actually planning on declaring me incompetent. Thank you, James, I said. Keep watching. After the call, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking. Violet and Eleanor's plan was becoming clearer. Gather medical evidence that I was incompetent, get guardianship, and then take control of the company, which I no longer had. In the afternoon, Arthur called. His voice sounded worried. Dad, can we talk? Alone? Of course, son. Come over when you can. I'll be there in an hour, he said, and hung up. Arthur arrived as promised an hour later, alone without Violet, which was unusual. He looked gaunt, as if he'd been up all night. What's going on, Papa? He asked as soon as he crossed the threshold. Violet was on the phone with her mother half the night last night. They thought I was asleep, but I heard bits and pieces of conversation. Something about a contract, about you slipping through their fingers. What does it all mean? I sighed. The moment of truth had come sooner than I'd expected. Let's go to the study, I said. This is going to be a long conversation. We went into my study, the only place in the house where I felt truly safe. Floor, two ceiling books, a leather armchair where I'd spent thousands of hours reading manuscripts, an antique globe in the corner, a gift from Elizabeth for our 10th anniversary. Arthur, I began as we sat down, I want you to listen to me carefully. What I have to say may seem incredible, but I have proof. And I told him everything. About Violet and Eleanor's sudden interest in the company after my stroke, about Violet's meetings with expert doctors, about Eleanor's visits to the nursing home and the law firm. They were planning to declare me incapacitated, I finished, to take control of the company and send me to Sunset Gardens, a cheap boarding house where the residents live out their days in total oblivion. Arthur listened without interrupting. His face gradually paled and his eyes widened with shock. No, he said at last. It's impossible. Violet would never. She cares for you. We both do. Son, I pulled the folder James had handed me from the desk drawer. Here are pictures of Violet with Doctors Morris and Lewinsky. Here's a report of Eleanor's visits to Sunset Gardens. Here's a recording of their phone conversation from yesterday. I turned on the recorder. Violet's voice, distorted by interference but quite recognizable, filled the room. He's hiding something, Mom. This contract with Callahan, there's something wrong here. Oliver would never give control of the company to an outsider unless he had some sort of gain. Don't panic, dear, Eleanor replied. We'll still get our way. We already have a preliminary report from Morris. One more from Lewinsky and we can file for custody. But what if he has had time to do something with the stocks? Rewrite them? To who? To Arthur. That's even better. Your husband is an open book. You can convince him of anything. You're right. Arthur never contradicts me, especially when it comes to his father. He's so afraid of disappointing him. I turned off the tape. Arthur sat with his hands covering his face. It can't be, he whispered. Can't be. I'm sorry, son, I said quietly. I'd give anything for it not to be true. Arthur looked up at me, tears in his eyes. What have you done? He asked. The Callahan contract, you said. What's really in it? I hesitated. Should I tell him the whole truth? Wouldn't it be another blow to him? I sold the company, I finally told him, for $7 million. The money's already in my account, a new account that neither Violet nor her mother knows about. Arthur stared at me in amazement. You sold Cranbrook Press? Your brainchild? Yes, I nodded, and as you can see, it was the right decision. Otherwise, the company would have gone to Callahan anyway. Just through Violet, not directly from me, and I wouldn't have gotten a dime. Arthur stood up and walked over to the window. He stood with his back to me, his shoulders shaking. All this time, he said quietly, I thought she was just looking out for you. About us, about the family. She cares about money, I replied, and she'd do anything to get it. Arthur turned to me. His face was contorted with pain. What am I going to do, Dad? That was the question I dreaded the most. What could I say to him? Leave your wife? Divorce her? That would be too direct, even cruel. You have to decide for yourself, I said. I can't tell you what to do. I can only warn you to be careful. Don't tell Violet what you know. Don't mention the money. And above all, don't sign any documents without reading them carefully. Arthur nodded. He looked as lost as a child who had learned that Santa Claus didn't exist. I'll have to think about it, he said. This is too much. Sure. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. Take some time, and remember, whatever you decide, I'm on your side. When Arthur left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because I no longer had to hide the truth from my son. Anxiety because I didn't know what he would do. Violet had a way of manipulating him, of playing on his feelings. What if she convinced him that I made it all up? That the old man was out of his mind and saw conspiracies where none existed? That evening, Violet called. Her voice sounded too carefree, which alerted me immediately. Oliver, how are you? Arthur said you two had a good talk today. Yes, I answered neutrally. It had been a long time since we'd seen each other alone. What did you talk about, if you don't mind me asking? Life, the past, the usual father-son talk. I understand, she said. a note of disappointment in her voice. By the way, my mom and I were thinking of coming over tomorrow. Eleanor found a great masseur who specializes in stroke rehabilitation. He could take a look at you. Another expert for the consult? I don't think so. Unfortunately, I'm busy tomorrow, I replied. Meeting with Callahan and the other investors. Investors? She asked too quickly. What investors? Hugo is raising additional funding to expand the company, I lied. I have to attend as a founder. I see, her voice turned cold. Well, maybe this weekend. Arthur is very worried about you. After the conversation, I called James. I need you to follow up with Arthur, I said. I'm afraid he might talk. And if Violet finds out that he knows what she's up to. Understood, James said. Don't worry, Ollie. I'll keep an eye on him. The next day, James reported that Arthur had returned home late that night, apparently after a few whiskeys at Frank's. He barely spoke to Violet, citing a headache, and went to bed early. It's good that he's keeping his mouth shut, James said. But alcohol isn't the best way to deal with news like this. I agreed. Arthur had never been a strong man. After his mother's death, he had withdrawn into himself, completely immersed in his historical research. Meeting Violet had seemed to bring him back to life. He was more confident, more outgoing. But now I realized it was only an illusion. Violet hadn't made him stronger. She'd just told him what to do. And when a man gets used to having decisions made for him, his independence atrophies like a muscle without exercise. Another day later, James broke the disturbing news. Violet was beginning to suspect something was wrong. Arthur was too obviously avoiding her, answering her in one-word answers, not making eye contact. She called her mother, James said. She said Arthur was acting strangely after talking to you. They decided to speed things up. Eleanor had already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer for tomorrow. Damn girl, I muttered. She wouldn't back down. Ollie, James's voice turned serious, be prepared for them to try to work through Arthur. If they convince him that you're really incapacitated, he might sign the guardianship papers out of good faith. It was a real threat. Arthur was always impressionable, and Violet could hit the right buttons. What are you suggesting? I asked. Get ahead of them, James replied. Officially announce the sale of the company. When they find out that the object of their lust is no longer yours, their whole plan will fall apart. What if they try to challenge the sale? Claim I was incapacitated when I signed it. They'd need a court order for that, and we have medical reports that prove you were sane at the time of the deal. Besides, Callahan won't just take the company away. He's got lawyers too, and good ones. I've been thinking about what he said. James may be right. The best defense is offense. All right, I said. Tomorrow I'll meet with Hugo and discuss formally announcing the deal. What about Arthur? James asked. Will you tell him your decision, I wondered. My son was at a crossroads. On one side was the truth he had just learned, and on the other was the wife he had lived with for 7 years. What would he choose? I'll call him, I decided. Let him know what I'm going to do. Then it's his choice. That evening I dialed Arthur's number, but Violet answered. Oliver, her voice sounded strained and polite. Arthur can't come over right now. He's not feeling very well. What's wrong with him? I asked, feeling every muscle tense. Nothing serious, just a migraine. You know, the last few days have been, stressful for all of us. Tell him to call me when he can, I said. It's important. Sure, she said. By the way, Oliver, my mom and I would still like to meet with you to discuss the future, your treatment, your care. We're very concerned. I'm sure you are, I said dryly. But I'll be busy for the next few days. We'll come back to this conversation later. Hanging up the phone, I immediately called James. They wouldn't let Arthur talk to me, I said. Violet claims he has a migraine, but I don't believe it. Check what's going on in there. I will, James replied. And Ollie, be careful. If they realized you knew what their plans were, they might act more forcefully. After my conversation with James, I couldn't find a place to be. What if Violet and Eleanor really were holding Arthur? Or worse, convincing him that I was out of my mind and seeing conspiracies where none existed? My son has always been vulnerable, too soft for this hard world, too trusting. Elizabeth protected him while she was alive. And then Violet came along and replaced one guardianship with another. And now my son had to make the hardest choice of his life, between a wife who cheated on him and a father who withheld from him an important decision to sell the company. What would he choose? And would I be able to accept his choice, whatever it was? The next morning began with an unexpected phone call. Arthur, his voice sounded strange, too steady, as if he were reading a pre-prepared text. Dad, we need to talk. I'll be there at 3 o'clock, okay? Of course, son, I answered, trying to catch any hint of his mood in his tone. Are you coming alone? A pause, so long that I thought the connection was broken. No, he said finally. With Violet, Violet's mom. My heart ached. So they'd gotten to him after all. Convinced him. Or forced. Or in Arthur's case, pretty much the same thing. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I'll be waiting. I called James right after I talked to him. They were on their way to my place. All three of them. Sounds like there's some kind of conversation brewing. Shit, James didn't hide his anxiety. Ollie, be careful. I found out something. Eleanor met yesterday with a lawyer specializing in guardianship of the incapacitated, and Violet picked up some paperwork from Morris Clinic. A report on my condition, I guessed. They move fast. Yeah. One more thing. Arthur was at their house last night. They talked for almost 2 hours. Judging by the look on their faces when he left, the conversation was difficult. Did they convince him? I can't say for sure, but when he got in the car, he looked lost. I thanked James and asked him to keep in touch. It was a few hours before the delegation arrived, and I used the time to gather my thoughts. What would Arthur say? What would I say? Admit that the company had already been sold, or keep playing the game, pretending that I just handed control over to Callahan? On the one hand, the truth could stop their plans to declare me incapacitated. Why do that if I didn't already own the company? On the other hand, they could try to challenge the deal by claiming that I was incapacitated at the time of the transaction due to the effects of the stroke. I decided to proceed on a case-by-case basis. I'd listen to what they had to say first, assess Arthur's mood, and then make a decision. At 3:30, Ruth arrived. I had asked her to come, though she was not usually at work on Saturdays. I didn't want to be alone with them. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. They were always punctual. That was probably the only thing I appreciated about them. Ruth went to open the door. I could hear voices in the hallway. Arthur's calm, Violet's harsh, and Eleanor's mellifluous. Oliver, darling. Eleanor was the first to enter the living room, as if it were her home. How are you feeling? You look tired. She kissed the air near my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and something else, the smell of a predator smelling prey. I'm fine, I replied, not getting up from the chair. Come, sit down. Violet followed her mother, as impeccable as ever. Her suit, her hair perfect, her pearl earrings. She gave me a brief nod, not bothering to give me the usual kiss on the cheek. Apparently, she'd decided that pretending was no longer necessary. Arthur was the last to enter. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Circles under his eyes, unshaven chin, crumpled shirt. It was not at all like my always neat son. Dad, he came over and hugged me awkwardly. He smelled like whiskey at 3 in the afternoon, which was not like him at all. Arthur, I squeezed his shoulder tightly. It's good to see you. Ruth brought tea and cookies, which no one touched. Tension hung in the air, almost palpable. So, I began when Ruth came out. What did you want to talk about? Violet and Eleanor exchanged quick glances. Then Violet nodded to Arthur, as if signaling. Dad, Arthur cleared his throat. We're very worried about you, your health, your decisions lately. What kind of decisions? I asked calmly. Callahan's appointment as manager, for instance, Violet interjected. It was unexpected. It wasn't discussed with the family. Should it have been? I raised an eyebrow. It's my company, my decision. It's not just the company, Arthur continued, and I noticed Violet nudge him lightly with her elbow. We're worried about your condition. You've changed since the stroke. You've become suspicious. Paranoid, Eleanor added, looking at me with feigned sympathy. It's a normal consequence of cerebral vascularity, Oliver. Nothing to be ashamed of. I looked at them in turn. At Eleanor with her fake concern, at Violet with her ill, concealed impatience, at Arthur with his sincere but misdirected concern. "And on what basis do you draw these conclusions?" I asked. "What signs of paranoia have you noticed?" "You've become secretive," Arthur replied, "making important decisions without consulting your family." I suspected Violet and her mother of some kind of fraud. "And they're not?" I looked directly at my son. Arthur looked away. "Dad, they just want to help. We all want to help." "Oliver," Violet leaned forward, folding her hands in her lap. "We've consulted with the doctors. Dr. Morris is one of the best post-stroke specialists in the world. He thinks you need constant supervision and possibly adjustments in therapy." "And on what basis did Dr. Morris draw that conclusion?" I asked. "He didn't even examine me." "He looked at your medical history," Violet answered too quickly, "and based on the symptoms we described." "So you're saying you made the diagnosis in absentia?" I was being sarcastic. "Dad," Arthur intervened, "we just want you to agree to a consultation, a full checkup with specialists, to make sure everything's okay. And if I refuse?" Violet and Eleanor exchanged glances again. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to do things differently," Violet said, "in the interest of your health and safety." "How?" "Arthur, as your next of kin, can apply for guardianship," she said, her voice sounding almost bored, as if she were explaining the obvious. "Given your state of health and unusual behavior, the court will likely grant the petition." There it is, a direct threat. I looked at Arthur. He was sitting with his head down, not daring to meet my gaze. "And are you prepared to do that, son?" I asked quietly. "Declare your own father incapacitated?" "Dad, that's not—" he began, but Violet interrupted. "It's for your own good, Oliver. Arthur will just be your formal guardian. It'll give you the best care and protection." "Protection from what?" I asked. "From your own decisions?" "From mistakes you might make in your current state," Eleanor interjected. "Like handing over control of the company to Callahan. It was clearly a hasty decision, dictated by temporary disorientation." I could barely contain a smile. If only they knew how hasty that decision was. "What do you suggest?" I asked, pretending to consider their words. Callahan had already gotten to work. "It can be fixed," Violet said quickly. "A contract can be invalidated if, at the time you signed it, you were not fully aware of your actions." "And who will run the company in his place?" "Arthur and I," she answered without a shadow of embarrassment. "I have a legal background. Arthur knows the historical literature. Together we can keep the tradition of Cranbrook Press while modernizing the business processes." I looked at my son. He was still avoiding my gaze. "Arthur, is this your opinion too?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes a mixture of guilt and determination. "Yes, Dad. I think Violet and I might be able to help temporarily until you're fully recovered." I sighed. Violet's plan was obvious: to gain control of the company through Arthur, using his genuine concern for me as a cover for her ambitions. And it looked like she'd already convinced him she was right. At this point, I had to decide: reveal my cards or keep playing the game. Tell them the company was already sold, or let them think their plan might work. "I'll think about your offer," I said finally. "This is a big decision, and it shouldn't be made hastily." Violet hadn't expected to be so accommodating. She squinted warily. "Of course, Oliver. But don't take too long. Your health is the most important thing." "How much time do you need?" Eleanor asked. "A day? 2? A week," I said firmly. "I need a week to get things in order and prepare for the change." They exchanged glances again. I could almost see the gears turning in their heads. A week was too long. I could do something about it. But on the other hand, if they were too insistent, it would only confirm my suspicions about their true intentions. "All right," Violet said at last. "A week, but on one condition: that you don't make any important decisions without consulting us, especially about the company." "Agreed," I nodded. "No major decisions." Arthur looked relieved. Poor boy, he really believed we had reached a compromise. "Dad, thank you," he said. "You won't regret it. We just want you to be safe." "I know, son," I replied, looking into his eyes. "I know." After they left, I immediately called James and told him about the visit. "They're really going to file for custody," I said. Arthur agreed. They'd convinced him I was paranoid. Shit, James muttered. What are you going to do? I gave them a week. In that time, I need to gather as much evidence of their intentions as possible. I'm especially interested in meeting with this Dr. Morris. If they're preparing a false medical report, we need proof. Got it, James said. I'll focus on that. The next day, James sent me pictures of Violet leaving Dr. Morris's clinic with a folder. A little later, she and Eleanor are meeting with a man in a smart suit who, James found out, was a lawyer specializing in family law and custody. I decided to be proactive. I called my attorney, Richard Stern, with whom I had worked for over 20 years. Richard, I need your help, I said, explaining the situation. They're going to declare me incompetent and take the company. Can they do that? Richard asked. Do they have grounds? Only the ones they've created themselves, I answered. Bought medical reports and the testimony of Arthur, who they convinced I was paranoid. We need to have an independent medical examination, Richard said, and gather all the evidence of their collusion. The sooner the better. That same day, I was examined by an independent neuropsychiatrist recommended by Richard. Dr. Fisher, an older man with attentive eyes, gave me a full examination and concluded that, despite the effects of the stroke, I was fully sane and capable of making decisions. Harnakina, Mr. Cranbrook, he said as he filled out the medical report. I see no signs of disorientation, paranoia, or other mental disturbances that would call into question your competence. This was good news, but I knew the struggle was just beginning. That evening, James reported that Violet and Eleanor had visited the office of Bradley and Associates, a law firm specializing in guardianship matters. Arthur was with them, looking, in James's words, like a man going to his own execution. They've made an application, Ollie, James said. One of my contacts at the court confirmed the hearing is set for Friday. Friday. Only 3 days. They didn't wait the promised week. They acted immediately. That meant they were afraid that I would find out the truth, that I would retaliate. I contacted Richard immediately. The hearing is on Friday, I said. Richard, we need to prepare. Don't worry, he replied. We'll present Dr. Fisher's report and all the evidence we've gathered of their collusion. The court will see that this is an attempt to seize control of your assets, not a concern for your well-being. Despite his confidence, I felt uneasy. Arthur was my son, my only child. His testimony could be crucial. If he truly believed that I was incapacitated, I decided to make one more attempt to speak to him. I dialed his number, but Violet answered. Oliver, her voice sounded strained. Arthur can't come over. He's, on vacation. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon? I didn't hide my skepticism. Violet, I need to talk to my son. Immediately. That's not possible, she cut me off. Arthur needs to rest now. The last few days had been emotionally difficult for him. I'm sure it has been, I said dryly. Especially since you forced him to file for custody of his own father, against his will. Violet was silent for a moment, then said with contrived calmness, I don't know what you're talking about, Oliver. Arthur is acting purely out of concern for you. And if you continue with these paranoid accusations, it will only prove our point. Then let Arthur tell me himself, I insisted. He'll contact you when he's ready, she replied and hung up. I sat staring at the phone with a growing sense of unease. They were isolating Arthur, not letting him talk to me. That could only mean one thing. He was wavering, and they were afraid I might change his mind. The next day brought more disturbing news. James reported that Violet and Eleanor had met with another doctor, Dr. Lewinsky, who, like Morris, specialized in post-stroke conditions and was often an expert witness in court. They're putting together a concilium, James said. 2 independent opinions will carry more weight in court. What about Arthur? I asked. He hardly ever leaves the house. Violet accompanies him everywhere. They clearly have him under control. I could feel my anxiety growing. They were acting on a well-thought-out plan, and Arthur was a key figure in that plan. He was being used, manipulated, isolated from me. On Thursday, the day before the hearing, I received an official summons. It informed me in dry legal language that my son, Arthur Cranbrook, had applied for a declaration of incapacity and guardianship due to post-stroke personality changes manifested by paranoid behavior and inability to make adequate decisions. Reading those words, I felt bitterness and anger. Not at Arthur. He was just a pawn in Violet's game. But at her and Eleanor, who were willing to destroy my family and deprive me of my freedom for the sake of money. In the evening, I tried to call Arthur again. This time, Eleanor answered. Oliver, her voice sounded fake sympathetic. Arthur can't talk right now. He's, very upset. Upset? I asked her again. Upset about what? This whole situation, of course, she answered. It's not easy for anyone to file for custody of their own father, but he's doing it for your sake. Then let him tell me himself, I demanded. You'll see him in court tomorrow, Eleanor said. There will be an opportunity to talk. In front of witnesses, she added meaningfully. After the conversation, I realized that they wouldn't let me talk to Arthur before the hearing. They were afraid that I might change his mind, show him proof of their collusion, open his eyes to Violet's true intentions. On the morning of the hearing, I met with Richard in his office. We discussed a defense strategy to present Dr. Fisher's report, to show evidence of Violet and Eleanor's collusion, to emphasize that I sold the company of my own free will, being in my right mind. The main thing is not to lose your temper, Richard advised. They will try to provoke you, to make you look emotionally unstable. Don't give in. I nodded, though I knew it wouldn't be easy, especially when I'd see Arthur sitting on Violet's side, actually opposing me. Before I left for court, I got a text from James. They've just left the house. Arthur looks terrible, pale, tense. Violet won't take a step away from him. I sighed. Poor boy. He'd always been too soft for this cruel world, too trusting, too easily influenced. On the way to the courthouse, I thought about what I would say to Arthur if we had a chance to talk. How I would explain that I wasn't angry with him, that I understood he was a victim of manipulation. How I would ask him to open his eyes and see the truth. But most of all, I thought about what would happen afterward. If the court rejects their application, Violet won't stop. She'll come up with a new plan, find a new way to get the money, now that she knows the company's been sold. If the court grants the application, then not only will I lose my freedom, I'll lose my son. Either way, our family would never be the same again. And that was perhaps the bitterest realization of all. The courthouse, gray and monumental, seemed to mock my situation. I walked up the steps, leaning more heavily on my cane than usual. The nervous tension of the last few days had made itself felt by the increasing weakness in my right leg. Richard walked beside me, holding a bulky folder of documents. Take it easy, Oliver, he said as we stopped in front of the conference room doors. Remember, you're sane, and we have proof of their collusion. I nodded, trying to calm my breathing. Inside the hall, I saw them at once. They were sitting on opposite sides of the room, Violet in a dark blue suit, Eleanor in a gray dress with a string of pearls, and between them Arthur, pale and gaunt, with a wrinkled jacket that hung on him as if off someone else's shoulder. Our gazes met, and I saw in my son's eyes a mixture of guilt, fear, and a kind of desperate determination. He looked away quickly when Violet whispered something in his ear, putting her hand on his shoulder in a gesture that might have seemed supportive from the outside, but I could see it was a gesture of control. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Their attorney, Michael Bradley, presented the opinions of Doctors Morris and Lewinsky, who claimed I was suffering from post-stroke dementia with paranoid tendencies. Arthur testified, speaking in a quiet, uncertain voice about my altered behavior, unfounded suspicions, and impulsive decisions. Richard masterfully parried, presenting Dr. Fisher's report in the testimony of years of colleagues that I was completely sane. But he saved the main trump card for last, the documents on the sale of the company, confirming that the deal was concluded on my initiative, on favorable terms, and Hugo Callahan was ready to personally confirm my sanity at the time of signing. When these documents were presented to the court, I saw Violet and Eleanor's faces change from confidence to shock, from shock to rage. Arthur, on the other hand, just looked confused, as if he didn't know what was going on. The judge, an elderly woman with shrewd eyes, scrutinized all the materials and finally dismissed the guardianship petition, saying she saw no grounds for declaring me incompetent. Mr. Cranbrook has demonstrated an ability to make sound business decisions, she said. The sale of the company, according to the documents submitted, was done on favorable terms and with full understanding of the consequences. This does not indicate incapacity. When the meeting was over, Violet and Eleanor quickly left the room, practically dragging Arthur with them. I tried to approach my son, but Violet stepped between us, eyes blazing with barely contained anger. "Not now, Oliver," she said through gritted teeth. "Arthur needs time." I saw her son glance over his shoulder as they left, a mixture of emotions that made my heart sink. But before I could say anything, they were out the door. "Don't worry," Richard said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You won. They won't be able to get custody." "I won the battle, but not the war," I replied. "They won't stop." And I was right. That evening, James reported that something strange was going on at Arthur and Violet's house. "There's a lot of traffic," he said. "People were coming and going. It's like a meeting." "They're regrouping," I guessed. "They're coming up with a new plan." "Most likely," James agreed. But it's hard to tell exactly what they're up to." Arthur looks absent, like he wasn't involved in what was going on. That's what worried me the most. His condition, his detachment, the way Violet and Eleanor controlled his every move. "I need to talk to him," I said. "Alone, without them." "It won't be easy," James warned me. "They wouldn't leave him alone for a minute." I thought about it. I needed a plan, a way to lure Violet and Eleanor out of the house, or at least divert their attention. "James," I said, struck by a sudden idea, "what if we created a situation where they had to leave Arthur behind? Like some urgent meeting they have to go to together." James thought for a moment. "I have an acquaintance at a law firm called Ross & Associates. They could set up a fake meeting, say they have information that would help challenge the sale of the company. Violet and Eleanor would definitely fall for it." "Fine," I agreed. "Let's give it a shot." The plan worked even better than we expected. The day after the trial, Violet received a call from a lawyer who said he had proof that I was incapacitated when I signed the contract with Callahan. Evidence that could completely change the outcome of the case, but it could only be discussed in person and as soon as possible. James, who was watching the house, reported that Violet and Eleanor had left the house in a hurry, leaving Arthur alone. This was my chance. I arrived at my son's house 15 minutes after they left. I rang the doorbell, preparing myself for the possibility that Arthur might not answer or even want to talk. But the door opened almost immediately. Arthur stood on the doorstep, pale, his eyes red from sleep, his shirt wrinkled. He looked surprised but not frightened or hostile. "Dad?" he said as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, "without Violet and Eleanor. Can I come in?" He hesitated for a second, then stepped back, letting me into the house. "They'll be back soon," he said, glancing nervously at his watch. "They're meeting with some lawyer." "I know," I nodded. "That meeting doesn't really exist. I arranged it so I could talk to you alone." Arthur stared at me, his eyes widening. "You? What?" he stammered. "So Violet's right then? Are you really manipulating the situation?" "No, son." I shook my head. "I'm just trying to protect myself and you from being manipulated by your wife and mother in law." We went into the living room. The house I'd been in hundreds of times suddenly seemed foreign and cold. Perfectly tidy, impersonal gray and white everywhere. Violet's choice, of course. Nothing of Arthur's, nothing personal, nothing warm. "Why are you here?" Arthur asked, sitting down across from me. "To reproach me? I know you're angry about the custody petition." "I'm not angry with you, son," I interrupted. "I realize you've been manipulated, but I need you to see the truth." I pulled a small device out of my pocket, the voice recorder James had given me. "What is it?" Arthur asked warily. "Listen," I answered, pressing the play button. Violet's voice came out of the speaker, slightly distorted but recognizable. "Mom, the plan didn't work. He somehow sold the company before we filed for custody. $7 million. Can you believe that? And all this time he's been toying with us, pretending he just handed over management." Eleanor's voice. "Don't panic, dear. The money can still be obtained. If not through the guardianship, then another way. The main thing is to keep Arthur under control. He's our only legal link to Oliver." "That's not a problem," Violet replied with a cold chuckle. "Arthur will do whatever I say. He's always been a weakling, just like his father." "Don't underestimate Oliver," Eleanor warned. "He turned out to be more cunning than we thought. Selling the company in secret is a smart move." "Yes, but where's the money?" Violet's voice sounded annoyed. "It's not in his regular accounts, I checked. He must have transferred it somewhere." We'll find it, Eleanor said confidently. And if we don't, we'll make him tell us. At his age and with his health, there are ways. I turned off the tape and looked at Arthur. He was sitting frozen, with an expression of such shock on his face as if he'd been punched. This, it's a fake, he whispered. You could have. Technology now allows. Son, I leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye. You know these are their voices. They're real words. Deep down, you always suspected that Violet wasn't being sincere with you, that she wasn't driven by love. Arthur covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. When did you write this down? He asked in a muffled voice. Last night, I answered. James had installed a listening device in their car. The conversation had taken place when they were returning from court. Arthur was silent for a long time, so long that I began to worry. Finally, he raised his head. His eyes were red but dry. I always knew, he said quietly, somewhere deep inside, but I didn't want to admit it. It was easier to obey, letting her decide for me. I understand, I nodded, but you have to make a choice now, on your own. What choice? He looked at me lost. What do I do, Dad? Before I could answer, we heard the sound of a car pulling up. Violet and Eleanor were back sooner than we'd expected. Damn it, Arthur breathed, jumping up. They can't know you're here. They'll be furious. His fear of his wife struck me to the core. It wasn't just discomfort or unwillingness to conflict. It was real, animal fear. Arthur, I stood up, putting my hands on his shoulders. You shouldn't be afraid of your own wife. It's not normal. You don't understand, he whispered. She knows how to hurt, not physically, but I understand. I nodded. Believe me, I understand better than you think. The sound of the key in the lock made us both flinch. Go out the back door, Arthur said quickly. I'll distract them. Arthur? I squeezed his hand tightly. You're not alone. Remember that. I managed to slip out the back door just as Violet and Eleanor entered the house. Standing in the shade of the trees in the backyard, I could hear their voices, harsh, angry. No lawyer was there, Violet shouted. It was a trap. Do you understand? He's playing us. Calm down, Eleanor's voice sounded colder, more controlled. Not in front of Arthur. What difference does it make? Violet snapped at her. He won't do anything anyway. He never has. I didn't listen any further. My heart ached for my son, but I knew he had to make that choice for himself. I couldn't decide for him. When I got home, I called James right away. I talked to Arthur, I said. I showed him the tape. And how did he react? Shocked, but, not surprised. I think he always knew, just didn't want to admit it. What now? James asked. They'll probably realize that you set up the fake meeting. Absolutely, I agreed. But it's done. Arthur has heard the truth. Now it's up to him what he does with it. And if he does nothing? James asked the question that had plagued me too. What if he stays with her? They're not going to stop, Ollie. They'll be looking for money, and they might use other methods. I knew he was right. Violet and Eleanor were too far gone to back down. $7 million was too much money to just let it go. I know, I said, but I'm ready. I have a plan. After my conversation with James, I sat in my office looking at Elizabeth's picture. What would she do in my shoes? How would she protect her son from a woman like Violet? Elizabeth had always been wiser than me, seeing people through. She would never have let Arthur marry Violet. But I was blinded by joy for my son, who seemed to have found happiness at last. I turned a blind eye to the obvious signs. I didn't want to believe that behind the beautiful facade lay such calculating behavior. Now I had to correct my mistake. Protect my son, even if I had to act harshly to do so. Even if I had to make a decision he might not like. The next morning I met with Richard in his office. We discussed the next legal steps. They may try to challenge the sale of the company, Richard said. Claim that you were incapacitated at the time you signed. Let them try, I replied. We have Dr. Fisher's report confirming my sanity. In addition, Hugo Callahan is willing to testify that I was completely sane when I made the deal. Yes, but the litigation could take months, Richard warned. Are you ready for that? I am, I nodded. But I hope it doesn't come to that. Arthur has heard the truth. Maybe he'll make the right decision. Richard looked at me skeptically. Oliver, I don't want to upset you, but Arthur's been under that woman's influence for 7 years. That doesn't go away overnight, even if you showed him proof of her lies. I knew he was right. I saw the fear in my son's eyes, his insecurity, his habit of obedience. Violet had methodically destroyed his will all these years, turning him into a shadow, a puppet. Even if he wanted to leave her, could he? After my meeting with Richard, I went to the bank. I had to make sure that the money from the sale of the company was secure and that Violet couldn't get to it in any way. The bank manager, Mr. Parker, met me personally in his office. Mr. Cranbrook, he shook my hand. What can I do for you? I want to make sure my funds are safe, I said, and to make some changes to the terms of the trust. We discussed the details and I amended the trust documents so that Arthur could access the money, not only if he divorced Violet or died, but under certain conditions, even if he remained married. For example, if he moved to live apart from her for more than a year. It was a compromise. I didn't want to completely disinherit my son, but I couldn't let the money fall into Violet's hands either. When I got home, I found a message from Arthur on my answering machine. His voice sounded strained, as if he were speaking for fear of being overheard. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation, about the recording. I need some time, but I want you to know that I believe you. I always have. It's just been, it's easier to overlook the obvious. I'm sorry. I listened to that message over and over, feeling hope and anxiety struggling inside me. Arthur understood the truth, but would he have the strength to act? Or would Violet get the upper hand again, convince him that the tape was doctored, that I was manipulating him? James called this evening. Ollie, I've got news, he said. There's a serious conflict at Arthur and Violet's house. Neighbors heard shouting, dishes clattering. The police have not been called, but the situation is tense. Arthur finally decided to confront her, I muttered. Brave boy. Maybe, James agreed. But I'm worried. Violet is a dangerous woman. Eleanor, too. They might take extreme measures. I knew what he was talking about. If Arthur openly confronts Violet, she could use any means to maintain control, including physical violence or psychological pressure that could drive him to despair. I have to intervene, I said firmly. Help him get away from her. How? James asked. You can't just barge into their house and take him away? No, I agreed, but I can offer him a safe haven, a place he can go when he's ready. The next day I sent Arthur a text. Son, if you decide to leave, you have a home. Always, I'll be waiting. There was no reply, but I didn't expect one. Violet was probably checking his phone, reading his messages. But I hoped Arthur would see and realize he wasn't alone. As the days went by, I didn't hear from Arthur. James reported that arguments broke out in the house, but Arthur never left. Every night I sat by the phone, hoping for a call that never came. And then I made the difficult decision to act on my own. If Arthur couldn't find the strength to leave Violet, I had to help him in another way, even if he didn't approve of my methods, even if he was angry with me. I met with Richard again and explained my plan. He listened carefully, then nodded. It's risky, Oliver, he said, but it could work. And frankly, I don't see any other way. If Arthur can't break free of her influence on his own. Exactly, I nodded. Someone has to make the first move, and that someone is me. When I got home, I wrote a letter to my son, a long, frank letter explaining my actions and my motives, a letter he would receive later, when it was all over. Dear Arthur, I wrote, when you read this, you will probably be angry with me. Perhaps you will not understand my motives, but believe me, everything I do out of love for you. Sometimes parents have to make tough decisions for their children, even if the children are grown, especially if they see that the child is in danger but can't protect themselves. I wrote for a long time, pouring all my thoughts, fears, and hopes onto the paper. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and put it in the safe with other important documents. The next morning, I began to implement my plan. The first thing I did was to call Hugo Callahan. Hugo, I said, remember when you offered to help me if I needed it? It was time to take advantage of your offer. After talking to Hugo, I contacted James and explained my plan and the role he was to play. Are you sure you want to take this step? He asked. It's radical. I'm sure, I answered firmly. I have no choice. They won't stop until they get what they want, and I can't let Arthur continue living in this nightmare. James was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, I'll go with you. When do we start?" "Tomorrow," I said. "Everything has to be ready by tomorrow." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calmness. The decision was made. The path was set. Perhaps Arthur would never forgive me for what I was about to do. Perhaps he would see my actions as the same manipulation that Violet had used on him. But I had to take the risk. For him. For both of us. That evening, I sat in my office, looking at Elizabeth's picture. What would she say about my plan? Would she approve? Or would she think it was too radical? "You've always been wiser than me, Elise," I thought. Seen farther, understood deeper. "What would you do in my place?" And though I couldn't hear her answer, deep down I knew she would have done the same. She would always protect her son, even if she didn't like it herself. Even if it meant making a hard decision that could change our family forever. I picked up my cane and slowly stood up. Tomorrow would be a tough day. The day I would finally take control of the situation. The morning began with a fine, almost imperceptible rain. Typical Dover weather that the locals barely notice. I stared out the window at the blurred landscape, thinking about the day ahead. The plan was ready, all participants briefed. All that remained was to put it into action. At precisely 9 o'clock, I met Richard Stern in his office. The lawyer's office, with its heavy oak cabinets and leather armchairs, was reassuring. It was the place where decisions had been made over the years that had changed people's fates. "All the documents are ready," Richard said, laying out the papers in front of him. "The will, the powers of attorney, the trust. The final touch is your signature." I took the pen, thinking for a moment about the weight of the moment. With these signatures, I not only protected myself legally, but also cut off Violet and Eleanor from any chance of getting their hands on my money. "Oliver," Richard put his hand on the papers before I started to sign, "are you sure you want to take this step? It's irrevocable." "I'm sure," I nodded. "They've left me no choice." Richard took his hand away and I signed each document. A will that transferred all my assets, except for the money in the trust for Arthur, to charitable organizations. A power of attorney to manage my affairs in the event of incapacity, not for Arthur, but for an independent financial manager. A trust order stating that Arthur could only receive the funds under certain conditions, chief among which was the severance of my relationship with Violet. "What's next?" Richard asked, gathering up the signed documents. "The hard part comes next," I answered. "I've invited them to a meeting at 3 o'clock this afternoon, at my house." "All three of them?" Richard raised his eyebrows. "Violet, Eleanor, and Arthur?" "Yes," I nodded. "It's time to dot the I's and cross the T's." Richard shook his head. "It's risky, Oliver. They might not hold back, especially when they find out the money isn't available to them. That's why James will be in the neighborhood," I said. "And you'll be there too, a little later, when I give the signal." We discussed the details and I went home to get ready for the meeting. Ruth helped tidy up the living room, though I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't know the details of my plan, but she could sense the tension. "Mr. Cranbrook," she said, setting out the teacups, "are you sure you don't want me to be present during this meeting?" "I am sure, Ruth," I smiled. "It's a family matter. Besides, James will be here. Don't worry." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. In her 15 years in my house, Ruth had become almost a member of the family, observant, caring, and loyal. At 3:30, James arrived. We checked again that the tape recorder was working, and he took up his position in my office, adjacent to the living room, where he could hear the whole conversation without being seen. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, preparing for a difficult conversation, and went to open the door. There they were, standing on the doorstep, Violet impeccable as always in her gray suit, Eleanor with a strange smile and a string of pearls around her neck, and Arthur pale, with circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in several nights. "Come in," I said, stepping back. "I am glad you have come." They entered the house and I noticed Violet looking around the living room with an appraising eye, as if assessing the value of the furnishings. Eleanor was being polite, and Arthur just looked lost. Arthur just looked lost. "Oliver," Violet began as we settled into the living room, "your invitation was Unexpected, especially after everything that's happened. I thought we should have a straight talk, I said, to dot all the I's and T's, as they say. We're always for open dialogue, Eleanor smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Isn't that right, Arthur? My son only nodded, not lifting his gaze from his hands. Good. I leaned back in my chair. Then let's start with the truth. I know about your plans, Violet. I know what you and your mother have been up to all along. She tensed, but quickly pulled herself together. What plans are you talking about, Oliver? If this is another one of your paranoid ideas— Stop it, I interrupted. Game over. I have tapes of your conversations with Eleanor. I know you were planning to declare me incompetent, take control of the company, and send me to a cheap nursing home. Violet and Eleanor exchanged quick glances. I saw fear flash in their eyes, quickly replaced by calculation. This is ridiculous, Eleanor said, but her voice didn't sound as confident as it usually did. You have no proof, because there is nothing to prove. We've always wanted only the best for you. Did you? I pulled a small tape recorder out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Then perhaps you can explain this one? I pressed the play button, and Violet's voice filled the room. Mom, we need to move fast. If the old man suspects anything, he could change the will or worse, sell the company. And I didn't put up with that weakling Arthur for 7 years to be left with nothing. Eleanor's voice. Don't worry, dear. Our plan is flawless. 2 doctors are already ready to certify his incapacity. The legal side is all taken care of. As soon as we get custody, the company will be ours and we'll send the old man to Sunset Gardens, where he'll be taken care of in a way that won't last long. I turned off the tape and looked at their faces. Violet was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Eleanor looked like she'd swallowed something sour. And Arthur? Arthur looked at his wife and mother-in-law with an expression of such horror and disgust that I felt sorry for him. It's a montage, Violet said. You tampered with the tape. Technology now allows— Stop it, I interrupted again. I have more than one tape. I have photographs of your meetings with Doctors Morris and Lewinsky. I have evidence of your visits to Sunset Gardens. It's all documented. Violet stood up abruptly, her eyes glittering with rage. And what are you going to do with this so-called evidence? Sue? On what grounds? We haven't done anything illegal. Not yet, I agreed. But the intent is clear, and the court will see that if it comes to a case. What case? Eleanor intervened, trying to keep her composure. Oliver, let's not be dramatic. If there's been a misunderstanding— Misunderstanding? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You were planning to declare me crazy and take the company. What misunderstanding could there possibly be? Arthur finally looked up. There were tears in his eyes. Is it true? He asked, looking at Violet. What's on the tape? Is it really you? Violet hesitated for a moment, then her face changed. The mask of politeness fell away, revealing a cold, calculating essence. What difference does it make? She snapped at him. You won't do anything anyway. I never did. Always been too weak, too cowardly to act on your own. Arthur flinched as if struck by a blow, but didn't look away. Tom, I loved you, he said quietly. All these years. Even when I felt something was wrong, I kept believing that you loved me back. Love, Violet said the word with such disdain that even Eleanor looked shocked. How naive. Only money and power mattered in this world. Everything else is a fairy tale for weaklings. There was a heavy silence. I looked at my son, seeing his world crumble, and my heart ached for him. But I knew it was necessary pain, the pain of cleansing, the pain of truth. Anyway, Violet continued, turning to me, your company still exists, and as the next of kin, Arthur has the right to— The company is gone, I interrupted. Or rather, it's no longer mine. I sold it to Hugo Callahan for $7 million. It was a bombshell of a statement. Violet froze with her mouth hanging open. Eleanor clutched at her heart. And Arthur smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. Weakly, tentatively, but it was a smile. You? What? Violet whispered. When? Right after I noticed your and Eleanor's sudden interest in the company, I answered. My intuition told me that something was wrong, and I was right. $7 million. Eleanor said the sum so greedily that I shuddered. And where is that money now? In a safe place, I answered, where neither you nor Violet will ever get to it. Violet came closer, her eyes narrowed. You're forgetting about Arthur, she said quietly, threateningly. He is your son, your heir, and my husband. You're right about the first, but wrong about the second, Arthur interjected, rising to his feet. I am no longer your husband, Violet, as of this moment. She laughed, but it sounded false. Don't make me laugh, Arthur. Where will you go? What will you do? You're nothing without me. You always have been and you always will be. That's not true, I said, looking at my son with pride. Arthur is a gifted historian, an intelligent and kind man. He can handle it. And if he needs help, I'm always here for him. Violet shifted her gaze from me to Arthur and back again, realizing she was losing control of the situation. Then she changed tactics abruptly. Arthur, honey, her voice was suddenly soft, almost pleading. Don't listen to him. Your father is trying to break us up. You know that after his stroke, he became not quite himself. Those tapes are fake. I would never say those things about you. I love you. Arthur stared at her for a long time, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. No, he said at last. You don't. I never have. And you know what? I don't think I ever really loved you either. I was just afraid of being alone. Violet gasped with indignation, her face contorted with rage, the mask finally falling away. You're going to regret this, she hissed. Both of you will. No one treats me like that. Violet, calm down, Eleanor put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Not here, but Violet shook off her hand. No, Mother, that's enough. Do they think they can just get rid of us like this? After all I've been through? 7 years with that. That bastard. I saw Arthur flinch at her words, but he didn't back down. On the contrary, he squared his shoulders, as if he were growing stronger with each insult. You know, Violet, he said calmly, I am grateful to you. If it hadn't been for your greed, I might never have known what you really are. I'd still be living in an illusion. She stared at him in disbelief, then shifted her gaze to me. This isn't over, she said. There's money somewhere, and I'll find it. And this deal of yours can be challenged. At the time you signed it, you were incapacitated by the effects of a stroke. I don't think that would work, I shook my head. I have Dr. Fisher's report that confirms I'm completely sane. Besides, Hugo Callahan is willing to testify that I was perfectly sane when I signed the contract. We'll see about that, she snapped. I have connections, I have resources. You'll regret getting in my way. I pressed a button on the small remote in my pocket, a signal to James and Richard that it was time to intervene. Almost immediately, the door to the living room opened, and the two of them walked in. James with the impenetrable face of a professional, and Richard with a folder of documents in his hands. Who is it? Eleanor tensed, looking at the strangers. James Hall, private investigator, I introduced. The man who gathered all the evidence of your collusion. And Richard Stern, my lawyer. Mr. Cranbrook, Richard nodded at me, then turned to Violet and Eleanor. Ladies, I must warn you, any attempt to challenge the sale of the company or to gain control of Mr. Cranbrook's finances will be thwarted. We have all the necessary legal documents and proof of your collusion. Proof of what? Eleanor tried to save face. We haven't done anything illegal. Maybe, Richard agreed. But attempted fraud, conspiracy to incapacitate someone based on false medical reports, those are serious charges, which we're prepared to bring if you don't stop trying. Violet and Eleanor looked at each other, realizing they were trapped. Their plan had collapsed, the money was out of reach, and any further action could have legal consequences. Let's go, Mother. Violet turned abruptly. There's nothing more to do here. What about me? Arthur asked, looking at his wife. She gave him a scornful look. What about you? You've made your choice. Stay with your daddy. You two are worth each other. Two weaklings. With those words, she headed for the exit. Eleanor followed her, but at the door she stopped and turned around. You'll be sorry, she said quietly. Both of you. When they left, the room was silent. Arthur stood in the middle of the living room, looking both lost and relieved. Son? I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? He shook his head, then nodded, then shook it again. I don't know, he said honestly. Yeah, Don't know how I feel. 7 years. 7 years of my life with a woman who never loved me, who only saw me as a tool. I'm sorry, I said sincerely, but you're free now. You can start a new life. How? He looked at me with despair. She's right about one thing. Without her, I don't know who I am. She always decided everything, always told me what to do. You're my son, I squeezed his shoulder tightly. Smart, kind, talented, and you'll find your way. I'll help you if you let me. Arthur smiled uncertainly. Then his gaze fell on the tape recorder still on the table. This tape, you've known for a long time. Not long ago, I answered, but I suspected it from the beginning. After the stroke, their sudden interest in the company seemed suspicious. I didn't see it, Arthur shook his head, or didn't want to see, always finding excuses for her behavior. It's normal, I said. Love often blinds us. James and Richard tactfully retired to the study, leaving us alone. I offered Arthur tea and we sat in our chairs, looking at each other with new understanding. What now? Arthur asked. With the company, with the money, everything? The company belongs to Hugo Callahan now, I answered. He's a good man. He'll keep its spirit alive. I've split the money from the sale. Some of it will go to charity, some of it will be left for me to live on, and some of it I've put in a trust for you. For me? He looked surprised. After everything that's happened? You're my son, I smiled. The only one. And no matter what, I want you to have a future. But there's a condition. What's that? He tensed up. The only way you'll have access to the money is if you divorce Violet, I said. And if you live apart from her for at least a year. Arthur thought for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. I don't want to stay with her anyway. Not after what I found out. It's your decision, I said, and I respect it, whatever it is. We talked for a long time. About the past, about the future, about what had happened over the years. Arthur told me how Violet had gradually isolated him from his friends, how she criticized his every decision, how she made him feel worthless. And I listened, painfully aware that I had missed the moment when I could have stepped in and prevented it all. I'm going to file for divorce, Arthur said firmly. Tomorrow. You can stay here until you find your own place, I suggested. Thank you, he smiled gratefully. Yeah, but I think I want to try to manage on my own. Maybe rent an apartment, start over. I nodded, feeling proud of his determination. Whatever you say. But know this house is always open to you. When Arthur left to pack and book a hotel room, I was alone in the living room. James and Richard left too, assuring me that they'd be in touch in case of any more problems with Violet and Eleanor. I sat in the armchair, looking at Elizabeth's picture on the mantelpiece. Her smile seemed to brighten, as if she approved of my actions. We did it, Elise, I thought. Saved our boy. Albeit late, we did it. Thoughts of the future filled my head. What now? Stay in Dover, where every corner reminded me of the past? Or start a new life somewhere else? 7 million gave me the freedom of choice. I could move anywhere I wanted, do anything I wanted. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Italy, perhaps. I'd always dreamed of living in Tuscany, or the south of France, with its vineyards and leisurely pace of life, or maybe just another town in England, away from memories and away from Violet and Eleanor. Wherever I decided to go, I knew one thing. The toxic chapter of my life was closed. New opportunities, new horizons lay ahead, and perhaps a restored relationship with the son I'd nearly lost due to my own blindness. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and through the breaks in the clouds, the rays of the setting sun were shining through, coloring the world in warm shades of gold and amber. Symbolic, I thought. The end of one story and the beginning of another. Perhaps Arthur would not immediately find his way. Perhaps Violet and Eleanor would still try to cause trouble. But now in this moment, I felt certain. Everything would be fine. We had stood up to greed and manipulation, and we had grown stronger. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. An elderly man with a cane, but with a straight back and clear eyes. A man who wasn't afraid to protect himself and his son, even when it meant making difficult decisions. When I got sick, I hid from my son's wife. that I had sold my company for $7 million, I thought as I recalled the events of the last few weeks. And it's a good thing I kept my mouth shut, because 2 days later, she and her mother planned to leave me with nothing by taking the company away. A story that began with sickness and betrayal ended with hope and new possibilities. And in that, perhaps, was the main lesson. It is never too late to change your life. Never too late to protect yourself and those you love. Even if you have to make difficult decisions to do so. Even if you have to act alone to do so.